Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Pod TV's Economics with David M. Walker, who is the former U.S. Comptroller General of the United States. And today is June 9th, 2025, and we are going to be discussing the economics of the big bill and all the tariffs that are going on and the big debt that it could be leaving us, or could it be helping us? And with us today to discuss these concerns is David Walker. Hello, David. How are you doing today?
It's good to be with you, Kim. I thought you were a little bit old to have these dolls back there, but maybe that's for somebody.
Well, I'm traveling. I'm in California visiting, and I was looking for a good, quiet studio.
Oh, it's fine.
It's okay.
Don't go to downtown LA today.
Oh, yeah. I am concerned about that.
Yeah, sure. Who's not?
But I mean, I have to ask the same question some people in California have been asking is why are they not going into the sections where the criminals and the gangs are known to be? Why are they going into the homes and Home Depot and the stores and the restaurants? Why are they not actually, like they said, they were going to go after the criminals and gangs, and they are actually not going into those areas? So that is, I am concerned about that too, because they're not going where the criminals are, but that's not why we're here today, David.
Yeah. Well, that's why they do intelligence, because sometimes the criminals aren't where they normally would be because they don't want to be caught. And that's why you have intelligence. But in any event, all right, well, let's talk a little bit about where the big, beautiful bill is, which is One Big Beautiful Bill, I think, is the actual name of it. It's been called many things, including the Big Budget Buster, and there are different opinions about it. Okay, and let's talk about a few things from the start, and then maybe we'll have some interaction with some other panelists.
Okay, yeah, we have other panelists here with us.
The thinking was severalfold. In 2017. There was a major tax bill that was enacted into law that provided broad-based tax relief across the board, more for people who pay more, but it took a lot of people off the tax rolls because it significantly increased the standard deduction and reduced the number of people that had to file returns, and did provide tax relief for lower income people, but it provided more tax relief for higher income people because they pay more taxes. Okay. Right. As a percentage of overall. Those are scheduled to expire at the end of this calendar year. And therefore, the president ran on, he wants to make those cuts permanent because his view is that if you don't make them permanent, then that will end up being a significant tax increase on many Americans and could push us into recession. And he doesn't want to do that. All right. The truth is not all of those provisions are equal. Some are meritorious, some are not meritorious. And I think in the end, a number of them are going to end up getting extended. But not all of them are going to get extended. Now, here's the irony. When the president ran, he talked about several things. He wanted to make those permanent. He wanted to not tax tips with certain restrictions. He wanted to not tax overtime with certain restrictions. And he wanted to not tax Social Security benefits. In reality, the big, beautiful bill does have a provision to provide tax relief for overtime, does have a provision to provide tax relief on tips with some restrictions on both, does not have a provision to not tax Social Security, does propose a $4,000 deduction for seniors, but a deduction is very different than not taxing the amounts. And needless to say, Social Security benefits are typically more than $4,000 a year, if you will, even for the people at the bottom of the income ladder. He had proposed during the election cycle that he wanted to further reduce the corporate tax rate from 21%, which is one of the lowest in the world already, to 15%. The big, beautiful bill does not include that. Candidly, from my standpoint, 21 is low enough. When I did the 10 million a minute tour back in 2012, there was pretty much broad-based consensus that we needed to take it down to 25%. So 21 even went below what we really arguably needed to do in order to be competitive, although additional tax reforms in that area are needed. So the bill does provide, significant tax relief by extending the current provisions and by adding some new tax relief provisions. But, that means as compared to current law, it's going to exacerbate the deficit problem, because if you don't end up getting those revenues, the top line income minus expenditures equals the surplus or deficit. And we're very much in deficit. And so that doesn't help. Now, the president argues, well, this is going to increase economic growth. This combined with regulatory relief is going to increase economic growth. And in fact, the House Budget Committee does assume higher economic growth as a result of adopting this. But then the president also says, well, yeah, but the CBO, when they came out and said it's going to add, $3 to $5 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years, when we're already running deficits of $2 trillion a year, his comeback is, well, they didn't consider tariffs. We're going to make a lot of money on tariffs. Well, I don't know what we're going to make on tariffs, because we don't know what the tariffs are going to be. I mean, how can you estimate how much money you're going to make on tariffs when you don't even know what they're going to be? So that's a difficult situation. The bill also has additional funding for the Defense Department. It has additional funding for Homeland Security, including immigration enforcement. It has adjustments with regard to the Medicaid program. With regard to defense and the Homeland Security amounts, I think, frankly, those deserve scrutiny. I would argue that they're higher than they need to be in order to accomplish the objectives, especially with regard to the proposed funding for the border wall, $46.5 billion. There's no way you're going to spend $46.5 billion to build 1,000 miles of border wall. And
Right.
They are talking about not just the primary wall. They're talking about, a strategy that would end up having other barriers further away from the border. But that's an unbelievable number. There's a lot of pushback with regard to Medicaid. There's no question that there's an opportunity to save money in Medicaid, and it's gone up dramatically, 53% since 2019, even though the population inflation has only been 28. That's a big delta. And in fact, I've got a pending op-ed that's going to be published on that in the near future. And while I'm talking about op-eds today, the Wall Street Journal is supposed to post my op-ed on DOGE 2.0. It'll appear in the print paper tomorrow on what should DOGE 2.0 be, because DOGE 1.0 was not what we needed and clearly didn't accomplish what it asserted that it was going to accomplish. But much needs to be done, but how you do it matters. And you can find out more about it when you read the op-ed. But
DOGE 1.0 was more like a bull in a glass house. But I am curious, when we're talking about, the I guess money that they're setting aside for, managing immigration.
Right.
And I think personally, I mean, this would have been me, but instead of firing all those federal people that they claimed was using up so much money, I think I would have reassigned them to manage people and do the due process for some of the cases that were still pending, which are a lot. But one of my concerns in the bill is for ICE and the significant funding requested for $10 billion. And that they're doing retention and signing bonuses of close to $42,000 per ICE agent, where they'll get a bonus every, this year. And I think that that's a bit excessive. I don't get a $42,000 bonus ever. But, what do you think about that?
Well, I think there's absolutely no question that the pace of work and the risk associated with their work is greater now than it was prior to change in administration. And so I think some level of bonus is justified in order to attract and retain people. How much we can debate about whether or not the amount that's being proposed is appropriate under the circumstances. But I think some level of bonus is appropriate. Let's talk a little bit about Doge One and one of the things.
Okay, let's do that.
I mean, Doge. I don't think Elon Musk knew, and frankly, I don't think a lot of the media knew, that only Congress can cut spending. You can cancel all the contracts you want. You can cancel all the grants you want. It just frees up money to be spent on something else unless Congress rescinds the appropriation. And
Right.
now the administration this week has sent it up last week. It's going to be voted on this week, a $9.4 billion rescission bill, okay, to rescind a number of contracts and grants that were recommended by Doge. Well, 9.4 is way short of 175 billion, which was asserted, and and 2 trillion or 1 trillion, which was the target. But nonetheless, there could be other ones coming up. But I think what Doge realized after they came to understand that only Congress can cut spending, all right, is there's only one way you can cut spending without having to get congressional approval. And that is hiring freezes and involuntary reductions in force. And so that's what it did. Okay. It imposed hiring freezes. It imposed involuntary reductions in force. But then the other thing that it realized is because the way the rules work in the federal government, and since the performance appraisal systems in the federal government are basically, quote unquote, worthless, where you basically can't differentiate between who your top performers are and who aren't really doing their job. Okay, there's massive grade inflation, and I can get into some examples of that if you want later. But the bottom line is that means that the only thing you can do and not be subject to successful litigation is to, as I said, do hiring freezes, to eliminate or RIF probationary employees, and probationary employees are people that have been in their position anywhere from 1 to 2 years, depending on the facts and circumstances. And the ultimate irony there is people who get promoted are on probation again, even though they may have been there 20 years. And so the only other way that you can get rid of people is if you eliminate units or if you eliminate offices. And therefore, you're being non-discriminatory because you're eliminating everybody that relates to that unit or everybody who relates to that office. So that's what they've done. The problem is that those could be some of your better people. I mean, it could be some of your better people with regard to skills and knowledge. It could be some of your better people with regard to institutional memory. And in addition, the worst thing you can do is impose long-term hiring freezes, because that ends up having serious adverse consequences over time. And I know that firsthand because before I became Comptroller General of the United States, the agency had been involuntarily downsized 40% and 5-year hiring freeze before I got there. So I was suffering the consequences of that. But I still ended up reducing it another 15%, eliminating a third of the offices, eliminating a layer of management. But the way we went about it was the way that Doge should have gone about it. It was based on the strategic plan. It was based upon clearly defined, consistently applied, transparent criteria. It had due process throughout the whole thing. And that's what you need to do, because right sizing is tough, but how you do it matters.
Well, and I think that it was more for show than what it should have been. I think that they just wanted to show people they can go in and just, okay, we got all of this done in one time. Well, you can give a kid a crayon and he can destroy everything in the house in one crayon if it's not done, if you don't explain to him how it's done. I don't think they went by any rules or tried to even abide by any of the rules that existed. And they to me, created a bigger chaos, a lot of reasons for people to sue, and cost our country more money than what it should have done. I agree with you. I think we need a Doge 2, one that really focuses on the reality of all of the situations. And like you said, it's very transparent. With us today, I just want to bring in a panel. We have Dr. Sharif from Bangladesh. Hi, good morning, doctor. Welcome. And I'm sure you've got some input. And we have Steve Rao all the way from Raleigh, North Carolina. And well, Steve, I'll get you adjusted. Hold on just a second. I'm working in a different studio than what we normally get to work
It's
with.
okay,
So
Kimberly. No,
Okay.
it's a pleasure to see you. I gotta jump on another meeting, but I wanted to just always a pleasure to hear David Walker. I just think the world of him, and it's great to see you, sir. And campaign's going great. We're leading in the polls. Really excited. Thank you for your support. And I agree everything that you said on the debt. And I think it's up to Congress to take action. There's a lot of issues in North Carolina. They're trying to bring Doge here in the auditor's office, and we'll see what happens with that. And I just think the government's it's almost like turning on when I used to watch House of Cards on Netflix, I would think, oh, this could never happen. But now you just look at it, and I find it funny that Raymond Tusk, at that time it was Frank Underwood and Raymond Tusk, and I don't remember. And you got Trump and Musk, but I don't know. You remember that Raymond Tusk and Underwood had a falling out.
Yeah, and do you also remember that, was it Frank Underwood? Is that what it was? Yeah.
Yes.
Remember he had his cufflinks that were "F-U."
I know. Yeah, and then he would do the thing like this.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
I just love. You're making me want to binge watch that show tonight. And then he would. I love the cameos where he would. Maybe they should do that for the presidency, where Trump comes in on the camera and talks through us a little bit. Here's what I'm really thinking, and then he went back into the act.
Yeah, well, he tells us a lot of what he's thinking. Also, we have Rick Rosner with us.
Well, anyway, I didn't mean to.
Hi, Rick.
Well, I just want to end with some analysis. So I think, David, it's just interesting to see the disruption going on. I was in Washington just a few days ago, and it just seems that everybody is, this big, beautiful bill. I do think that it does add to the debt, takes away from Medicaid. I think it's dangerous to be adding to this kind of spending. I actually thought about you when I was talking about a PBS last week. Is that there's no talk about what it's doing to our deficit, and so I think it's going to be interesting to see how people support this, whether it's going to affect the U.S. Senate races and congressional races, and we'll see what happens. I mean, it's
well, I've been very outspoken about it on my social media, and so you can check my X, my LinkedIn, and my Facebook, and I've had several op-eds, and I've got another one in the Wall Street Journal today that deals with Doge 2.0. Oh, tomorrow. It's going to be tomorrow, but it's going to be online today. But that's about Doge 2.0. I've had other ones talking about what do we need to do to get our finances in order, because the big beautiful bill, aka the big budget buster, will make our fiscal challenge worse as compared to current law.
Yeah. By the way, my daughter is officially at the New York Times, Sonia Rao. She's a journalist on the breaking news desk of the New York Times. So,
well, congratulations!
Nice. Congratulations, that's awesome.
But
this was her first week on the job, so I'll
that's great. But my understanding is they don't accept op-eds anymore. They just have their opinion people, and that's it. So whatever.
Well, maybe we could change that, Mr. Walker.
That's why I went to the Wall Street Journal. Yeah. But anyway. Okay.
Well, I got to run. I've got to get to a meeting, but it's so good seeing everyone. I'll be back next week for the full hour. But great to see everybody. And I guess the other thing is what's going to happen with Ukraine, U.S. foreign policy. There's just so much going on today economically.
Let me mention one thing about Ukraine. My concern about the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons has increased. What's happened in the last week. Not strategic, tactical. And I've been concerned about that all along, but based on what happens in the last week, I'm more concerned about it. All right.
Absolutely.
That's an interesting thought. We need to listen to Sasha's show on that. That would be interesting. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, I had a question for David and everything because one of the things that I remember President Trump talking about was the need to cut budgets and all along those lines, and that's part of what Doge was about and everything. But there have been a couple of cases where he seems to be going counterintuitive to what he said he wanted to do, and I'm going to give you examples of what I'm talking about. Because like this evening, I think it's this evening or this week, he is meeting on the golf course, which is where he likes to meet his business leaders and everything, with the people with college sports. And we know that there was a recent announcement about college sports actually allowing people to get back pay from several years back if they were athletes. I think it's 10 to 15 years, but he's going to meet with them about trying to do some reforms in college sports that might be more expensive than what is currently existing. And we also saw that with the Kennedy Center, because I mentioned on our World Edition that the Kennedy Center is actually got an increase in their budget under Trump and some of the things that he wants to do and all along those lines. So I'm just wondering, are we seeing some examples of him being counterintuitive to what he said he wanted to do and all along those lines? And those are just two examples that I gave you.
Well, first, clearly the federal government does provide funding for the Kennedy Center.
Right.
But I'm not aware that the federal government provides funding for college sports. Okay. And I think that I haven't read the ruling that the decision that came down with regard to paying college athletes. I do think this: if the ruling came down to said that you can or you must pay college athletes, I think they ought to kill NIL, name, image, and likeness. I think it would be a disaster to be able to have a situation where you're paying college athletes above and beyond, giving them free tuition and room and board and things of that nature. And then on top of that, letting them do name, image, and likeness. I mean, I think would compound the problem. I look to somebody like Nick Saban, who's the GOAT, the greatest of all time college football coach, to be able to, weigh in on what makes sense here. One of the reasons that he left college football was because of the transfer portal, where there's no loyalty anymore. You can transfer after a year anywhere you want. And because of NIL and the combination of those two things, which made college sports more like pro, where it's all about the person, it's not about the team, and he's all about the team and about preparing people for the future. As far as spending, he was clear that he wanted to increase spending on defense and homeland security, and he's proposing significant increases in defense and homeland security. I would argue more than is necessary. Okay. Secondly, he clearly said that he wanted to end up reducing spending, starting with fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. The goal that was set by Elon Musk at the beginning was totally unrealistic, didn't pass the straight face test. And obviously, it's been disappointing as to what they've been able to find so far. Stay tuned and read the op-ed that I've got for the Journal, because I think what needs to be done is very different than what Doge did, and is much needed and long overdue, and could end up resulting in a much more dramatic reduction in federal spending, but in a much more intelligent way, if you will. So. Those are just a few thoughts that I have off the top of my head. Rick, you got your hand up, buddy?
I assume that the model you have for reducing government spending is the Bill Clinton model, which is look at each department in detail, in depth, and reduce the size of government by 30% over a period of 2 to 3 to 4 years, without just coming in with a bunch of 22-year-old idiots and slashing and burning.
I compared. I was asked to compare Doge to GAO. Okay, and the answer to your question is yes, but let me come back first. All right, and I said GAO is a long-standing and successful professional football team, and Doge is a pickup intramural football team from MIT. And so I think, but to answer your question, yes. I mean, but here's what I'm proposing. You've heard me say many times, the federal government's grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget, undercut states' rights. is not managed for results, not managed to achieve outcomes. And so what I'm proposing is, hey, it's time to step back. All right. What was envisioned that the federal government should do? Because keep in mind, the states created the federal government, not the other way around. Okay. When these departments and agencies were created, what were their stated purpose? What are they supposed to be doing? So let's compare what we have now to those two things. Secondly, what were we trying to accomplish when we created these departments and agencies? How do we measure success in outcome-based terms? How are we doing? What kind of outcomes are we getting? Are we getting better or worse? How do we compare to others? What tools does government have to use to try to achieve those outcomes? Direct spending, loans, guarantees, tax preferences, regulations, enforcement activities. How are we using those tools in an integrated and complementary fashion to try to achieve those outcome-based results? And then once you know that, then you have a much more intelligent basis to say, all right, what should we do? What should be devolved? What might be partially privatized? Where can we consolidate? Where can we streamline? Where might we need to enhance? We might need to be doing more in some areas than we're doing right now. But it's a much more comprehensive, integrated, outcome-based approach that needs to be done. And believe it or not, even though there's a law that says the federal government's supposed to have a comprehensive, integrated, forward-looking, outcome-based strategic framework, we still don't have one. We still don't have one. And so therefore, when the federal government wants to do something, they throw more money at it. And if it's not working, what do? They throw more money at it, even though it may not be achieving their objective. And in some cases, it's actually working against the objective. So those are just a few thoughts.
So, David, what is the impact of what's going on now with the controversial issues between Musk and Trump, and how is that impacting what Doge has done? Do you think Elon is feeling a little bit of guilt that he didn't do things right? I mean, why do you think all of this now? I mean, it's just very bizarre.
Well, I think there's several things. One, I don't think that Elon understood the dramatic differences between government and the private sector. Okay,
right.
When you are CEO, majority owner, chairman of the board of a company, you can do a lot of things, right. especially when those companies are non-union. Okay. You can do a lot of things, and you can do a lot of things very quickly. And that's what he's used to. So he took that concept and wanted to apply it to the federal government. Well, it's apples and oranges. Okay. And so that's the first thing. You remember he got asked the question, is it tougher to, make these kinds of changes in the federal government, or to put men on, or to colonize Mars? And it took him, he had to hesitate and think about it, about which one was tougher. Ultimately, he said colonizing Mars, but he had to think about it. Okay. I think the other thing that he's frustrated about, and this is just speculation. I haven't talked to him, obviously, but I think the other thing he's frustrated about is he wasn't able to achieve as much as he would have liked. Okay. Because only Congress can cut spending. He also was frustrated because the administration didn't send up rescission requests in a timely manner. And then when they did send up rescission requests, it was for $9.4 billion, when allegedly, they think they've come up with 175, which they haven't. Okay. I think the other thing that he's frustrated about is the quote unquote big, beautiful bill actually makes the fiscal situation worse, not better, as compared to current law. And he, along with others, including Ray Dalio and Jamie Dimon, have increasingly spoken out to say, hey guys and gals, things are out of control. You need to get control of things, and this doesn't get control of things. So I think it's a combination of those things. I think, you have two alpha males, all right, that are used to getting their way, and so it was probably a matter of time before there was going to be some conflict. Hopefully they'll reconcile. I mean, I think it's in their interest, in the country's interest, for them to reconcile. But again, I come back. I'm not looking at the personalities. I'm looking at not what needs to be done and how can we get it done?
Elon has, been, they say that he's quite the genius. Do you think it's also the difference of that he has actually read the whole bill and understands it more than what other people have done, even some of the creators of bits and pieces of the bill?
I don't know whether he's read the bill. But he could be using AI to be able to help him analyze
Right.
the bill, if you will. I mean, he's pretty efficient at that. Okay, but I will tell you this: I bet there's not more than this many people in Congress that have read the bill.
Right.
I don't think it's this many people,
I
and
don't
I'm
know.
sure the president hadn't read the bill. That's what you have people for. But
Right.
and the idea that you have a 1,000-page bill that you've got to push through the House in less than 72 hours is really rather absurd. But Doctor, go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Sharif, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your interesting discussions. And I always promote Pod TV in my countries, like stock exchange commissions and all of the places. They really appreciate our Monday economic show. Thank you, Kimberly and David Walker, for your brilliant contributions. But my question is that I just want to bring one question, but I want to bring some data. Now, I'm just observing from data right now, this US GDP growth is 1.6 to 2.2%, and their labor market look positive. On the other hand, their market sentiment is mixed. And if we see the South Asian market, we are observing, according to World Economic Forum, roughly it's 6% GDP in 2024, but 5.8 in 2025 due to higher tariff, external uncertainty, and vulnerable fiscal positions. Yeah, both of the economy in South Asia and USA has some of unstable conditions. But how we see this Trump put tariff around the world, this is number one, and how we fix this immigration law and all of the things. Do you think it will be helpful for US economy and the diplomatic relationship with rest of the world? What's your thought on that?
Well, first, let's talk about some stats. This is off the top of my head. Okay. Rick is our expert on looking up data real quickly, but as I recall, GDP growth was negative in the first quarter of 2025 by 0.3%. It's expected to rebound in the second quarter. We don't have an unemployment problem. Unemployment rate, I think, is held fairly steady at about a little over 4%. Inflation has actually come down in recent months. It's a little over 2%. Okay, inflation rate, but there is a great degree of uncertainty. Okay, and that is reflected in consumer sentiment, and a lot of that uncertainty has to do with the tariffs. Okay, what's going to happen with regard to tariffs right now, other than the 10% across the board, and other than steel and aluminum? I think for the most part, most of the other tariffs have been temporarily stayed in an attempt to try to negotiate reasoned and reasonable agreements over the next several months. They could be extended again and again. I mean, my personal view is what the United States ought to be doing is we ought to be taking steps to make sure that we're self-sufficient with regard to key national security and public health issues. We're not close to that right now. And by self-sufficient, by that I mean not necessarily domestic production, but domestic production combined with reliable sources from allies who are not potential adversaries of ours. We're not there yet, okay? Especially with regard to rare earth materials, especially with regard to materials for prescription drugs. We got to get there, but that's going to take several years, and it's not all going to be done through domestic production, if you will, and sources. Secondly, I think beyond that, I think you want to try to have as free and fair trade as possible. You want to try to avoid tariffs, and to the extent that you're going to impose tariffs, a true reciprocity concept has intellectual merit. Meaning, if you're going to tax our If you're going to put a 10% tariff on our cars coming into your country, we'll put a 10% tariff on yours if you make them. Okay, not everybody makes them. Okay, but what was rolled out by the president was not reciprocity. It was based upon the trade imbalances with various countries, and it was not well thought out. And it had a serious adverse market reaction. It had an adverse reaction with regard to, many countries around the world. And I think that's one of the reasons why the president decided to put a temporary pause on these and try to work things out. Right now, we only have an agreement, as I understand it, with the United Kingdom. I think the ones that are going to be by far the most challenging are China and European Union. There are meetings going on right now in London with China, involving our cabinet level officials and Chinese counterparts. So we'll see. But I think, markets don't like uncertainty. And I think the biggest uncertainty we have right now is what's going to happen with regard to tariffs. Now, the administration will tell you the biggest uncertainty that they have is what's going to happen with the big, beautiful bill. And I think in the final analysis, something's going to get passed, but it isn't going to be the House version. I mean, that there are going to have to be changes, that are going to have to be made in order to be able to, A, get it through the Senate, and B, be able to get it back through the House again.
I've said this time again, and one of the problems I have with a lot of the bills is the bigger the bill, the more complex it is, the more junk they put in there that really doesn't benefit anyone but themselves. And I've always been a big believer that no bill should be bigger than the same amount of pages as the Constitution, with, a little bit of flexibility for explanation. But I don't think there should be so much crammed into one bill. I get it. He wants to do everything with one wave of the wand, but I still believe that each item should be individually looked at and voted on. This is ridiculous. I mean, things like this could take forever, and then things that you really need are not getting accomplished. What are your thoughts on a big bill, David?
Well, first, I'm a supporter of the so-called regular order, okay, which means that you propose bills, you have hearings on them in the relevant committees of jurisdiction. You do markups within the relevant jurisdiction. You go through the rules committee to get it approved to go to the floor, and then you have debate and votes on the floor with the ability to make amendments within reason on the floor. But I will tell you that more and more frequently, especially when margins are close between one party and the next, they try to do mega bills. Okay,
Right.
Not just with regard to periodic legislation on various topics, but with regard to annual appropriations. You're supposed to have, depending upon the House or the Senate, 12 or 13 individual appropriations bills for different parts of the government that are supposed to go through the process that I just articulated. They get voted on and that ultimately get hopefully passed and signed by the president. But ever since 1996, they have ended up doing omnibus bills, which are, pull it all together and throw a bunch of other things in there because it's a must-pass bill. You don't want government operations to shut down, and so therefore they throw a bunch of other things in there on must-pass bills. They do the same thing on other things like the debt ceiling. They do the same thing on bills like continuing resolutions when they haven't been able to come agreement on appropriations, and they just say, okay, we'll spend what you spent last year for a period of time. So, Congress has been out of control for a long time. And no matter whether the Democrats or the Republicans run it, and it's exacerbated by the fact that the margins are so close. So that means that every election is about control. And there's a huge difference between whether you're in the majority minority, especially in the House. I think Rick and then Doctor.
Right. So earlier you mentioned departments of the government who haven't met their mandate. So You want to give a couple examples?
Well, I'm not saying, here's what I'm saying, Rick. What I'm saying is, I know for a fact, because I've run 3 federal agencies, 2 in the executive branch and 1 in the legislative branch, and they've been head of GAO, which has government-wide perspective. I've also been involved in things like duplication, overlap, and redundancy. Okay, and so the fact is, in many cases, what's happening is there's mission creep. The department or agency was created to try to address a particular problem, and it may well be focusing on trying to correct that particular problem, although not necessarily on an outcome basis, more on an activity basis. They tend to be more inputs and outputs rather than outcomes. But then there's a tendency to kind of grow your mission over time, okay, to kind of, expand your mission. Well, it'd be nice if we did this. In addition, there's very little coordination, totally inadequate coordination between various departments and agencies that are trying to address similar issues. And let me give you an example of human capital strategy, okay? Human capital strategy involves labor policy, it involves education policy, it involves immigration policy, it involves welfare policy, it involves tax policy. Those are all in different silos. They're all doing their own thing, okay? They're not necessarily coordinating their activities, and they're not necessarily focused on trying to achieve desired outcomes. So therefore you can evaluate return on investment and value for money. So that's really the issue. I'll give you another perfect example that's been in the news. USAID. USAID is important soft power for the United States. I absolutely believe that we need USAID, okay? But USAID, some of the things that it was funding had nothing to do with why USAID was created. I mean, right. USAID was to try to help, poor people in developing nations, deal with the challenges that they face, if you will. But, some of the things that they were funding were clearly beyond the pale, okay? But that doesn't mean you want to get rid of the whole thing. You just got to get back to court. You have a quick follow-up and then doctor? Yeah. Yeah,
while you were talking, I thought of an example of agencies not talking to each other.
Yeah.
9/11. The CIA, the FBI, they all had a piece of the puzzle. They knew quite a bit about what was gonna happen before it happened, but they don't talk to each other.
No, that's right. Okay, and I'll give you a story on two comments on 9/11. One, when you got people training to take off, but they don't care about training to land, that's a signal. Okay, I mean, the second thing is, and this is true story. I was right after 9/11. I think it was like 2 days after 9/11. I went to get some dental work done, and my dentist had a patient the day before who lived in an apartment complex out by Dulles Airport, who said that she saw a number of Middle Eastern men that were coming in and out of apartment there, and then since the attack, she hasn't seen them, and so I contacted the director of the FBI, the head of the FBI, and I said, "Here are the facts. I don't know whether there's anything to this or not, but I think it's something you probably ought to look into." He had his agents look into it. It was where the hijackers, the terrorists, it was their unit. It was their unit, and they did retrieve some computers and things of that nature, which helped them quite a bit in their investigation. I mean, and here I am sitting in the dental chair.
That's crazy.
It's true, though. Doctor, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Doctor.
Mr. David Walker, a very interesting discussion. When you discuss about USAID, we are observing from here, definitely USAID has very big impact in Bangladesh through healthcare research, through all of the good things. But when we observe that Trump complained that through USAID, US invests $29 million in Bangladesh, and it creates some political unstable conditions and some other thing. He complained actually against USAID, specifically with this example of India with Bangladesh and all of the things. Even he complained USAID paid $29 million for a NGO who has only 2 members. So do you think is it valid? This is number one. And number two, through this process, USA like this USA try to involve with different political issues, or it's actually the propaganda and all of the things. USAID has a lot of good things, but present government do not recognize them. What's your thought?
Well, part of the issue is, okay, what should USAID be doing? What is it trying to accomplish? How do we measure success? All right. And then how best to accomplish it. All right. In many cases, USAID works through NGOs. All right. But when you work through non-governmental organizations, whether it be domestic and international, you also want to make sure that they're legit. All right. That they have the capacity to do what they say they can do and what needs to be done, that they have low overhead, that a lot of the money is not going to basically benefit, people rather than going to the intended purpose. So, I mean, I think the problem is that, coming back to something that Kim said, DOGE engaged in a tactical transactional review of activities using artificial intelligence through government information systems to come up with examples of alleged fraud, waste, abuse, or mismanagement for the shock and awe approach. Can you believe that we spent X amount of money on Y in Z place? All right. And so that's what they did. The problem is it lacked contextual sophistication. It may be true that happened. Okay, that doesn't necessarily make it fraud. Okay, it could be a difference in policy as to what one administration versus another administration believes appropriate to use taxpayer funds for. But what it did is it sensationalized it, and then what ended up happening was, I believe, an overreaction that, well, we don't need USAID, or we really ought to cut back overall with regard to this area. When in reality, what you need to do is to take more of a scalpel rather than a chainsaw approach. You need to reform it, you need to refocus it, but you don't need to kill it.
Right.
Excellent.
Well done. Jatovi's joined us. Go ahead, Dr. Sharif. Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah. Just a follow-up, like as I'm working with the grassroots level communities, not only in Bangladesh, in South Asia and Asia Pacific, with Bangladesh, with India, with Pakistan, with Malaysia and Indonesia, we are working with different government agency, corporations, and academia. So how I learn from POT TV, I want to bring more learner in this ecosystem. Like I learned a lot from Nick, from Kimberly, from definitely David Walker, and we are heavily promoting it right now. So is this possible for this capacity building in the futures? We can continue some academic activities. We can invite you all and sponsor it and conference and go for a bigger contributions, real contribution in real world, not like just.
Why don't you work through Ken? Let me mention right now that next week I'm going to have to miss, because I'm going I'm going to be driving back from a 5-day vacation, and I really can't do this while I'm driving. So
right. No, we don't want that.
we'll have to do a rerun or something next week. But
we will host a rerun, or sometimes Nick and I can do some conversations.
Yeah,
maybe we'll review your op-ed, which would be a lot of fun. You're not here, but we'll review your op-ed.
I've had several of them lately, but
right. I mean, I try to keep up with you. You're harder to keep up with than anyone else when it comes to, you're really trying to make a difference, and you're getting the information out there. But there's just so much going on. But Jatovi's joined us. And Jatovi, do you have a question for David?
Well, I heard the discussion piece about how DOGE was sensationalizing what was going on and which caused the reaction. the extreme reaction on the other end. However, the part I disagree with, and Dave, I hope you can work with me on this one. The part I disagree with is that it was an overreaction. I think this was created, and this is from the way Trump's actions have always been. The showpiece was always to justify what he wanted to do in the first place. And there are pieces that are being cut, which, calling it fraud and calling it all these things and doing that showpiece was truthfully only a justification to garner support for, hey, look, we have to do this now. We're going to do this my way because I'm right and you agree with me now, which that's what I think Doge's specific purpose was mainly to elicit the response that it got, just so it could justify the cuts and the harm that it could do. So I don't think it was an overreaction, more so than it was what they wanted to do, but they needed to build support behind it. And the only way to do that is to create a sensation. Is to create two things: anger and fear. Yeah. And if you can create anger and fear, you can motivate people to do things that they really wouldn't do normally.
That's true.
Well, a couple of things. When I say the overreaction, I'm not necessarily talking about the overreaction to Doge. I'm talking about the overreaction on behalf of the government, where you end up eliminating a lot of things that are good and that are needed, rather than taking a scalpel approach and just getting rid of the things that are inappropriate or ineffective or otherwise questionable. I've said from day one that a vast majority of the things that Doge came up with represented differences in policy rather than fraud or illegal activities. They represented a difference between what the Biden's administration's philosophy and policy was with regard to a variety of matters, foreign aid, immigration, et cetera, DEI, rather than the current administration. All right. And the president does have the ability to change policy through executive orders, provided it's not contrary to the law and or the Constitution, if you will. And I think that there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation about what they were finding, also whether or not they were actually cutting spending, because a lot of these contracts, turns out they had already been executed, or they've been partially executed, or, and so I do believe one thing you said, Jacoby, and that is I do believe that part of the objective was to shock and awe, was to demonstrate, look at the world, what's going on, how we're spending money. Although in the reality, the amount of money that they were talking about was not that significant. For example, if you look at how much money we spend on foreign aid in the United States, it's less than 1% of the budget. All right. Well, 1% is still pretty good money when you talk about a $7 trillion budget. Okay. But I mean, and you're not going to balance the budget if you eliminate all foreign aid, right? Not when you got a $2 trillion deficit, and if you will. So I do think, it was intended to employ shock and awe. And I will tell you this, I mean, I'm a lead usher at my Catholic church, my Catholic parish. Okay. And one of the Eucharistic ministers who I talk to fairly regularly just lost his job, through a Doge effort this past week. And there have been a number of circumstances where people have gotten dismissed and then ended up getting rehired because they realize that, oh, geez, these people have skills or knowledge or experience that we really need, if you will. So I just don't think it was gone about in the right way. And while I do believe that we need to engage in a much more comprehensive, much more considered much more compassionate review with regard to right-sizing the federal government, because I do think it's bloated, not very efficient. I think we got to go about it a very different way than what Doge 1 did.
So Doge 2, who's going to be appointed, and how's that going to work, David?
Only God knows, and God's not telling us. But what I will tell you, what I will tell you is this: I think it needs to be a special initiative that is separate from the ongoing responsibilities of the OMB. Okay, I think it needs to be led by a person or persons, all right, who have direct government transformation experience and who have bipartisan credibility and support. Because in the final analysis, any big changes that involve in right-sizing government is going to take legislation. And in order for that to get enacted into law, it's going to take bipartisan support. Otherwise, it's a waste of time.
Where do we find that bipartisan support in this day and time? Because, you know, with all this uncertainty and everything has been so, to me, fine-tuned, divided, where do we even find someone like that?
Maybe we ask Grok. I mean, I don't know. Or
Right.
GPT.
GTTP.
Yeah.
You know, when you ask
no.
that, you know, what it
I mean,
thinks
The
big
truth,
bill.
the truth is there are very few people that have direct government transformation experience, although it could be federal, state, or local. Okay. I mean, it doesn't have to be federal, but, and secondly, there are not that many people that have proven bipartisan support. Okay. I mean, there's just not that many. I mean, you know, so, you know, just.
I mean, we're a definite, almost fine-tuned divide. Well, let me ask you this, because you brought up other countries and all of this. Is BRICS so significant now? Is it gaining more power? I don't hear much about it as much as we used to before a lot of this other nonsense.
Well, I think the biggest thing that people are concerned about with BRICS is their effort to potentially create an alt. That's the thing that we have to keep our eye on. Beyond that, I'm not as concerned. And we can see that gold has done very well, and that a lot of reserve banks are building their inventory of gold. And we've also seen that the dollar has lost somewhat of its luster, and we've also seen that the rates that the U.S. is having to pay to refinance its debt have been going up, and that's because of the structural imbalance that exists that we need to come to grips with, among other things. Let's go, Rick, and then Jatovi.
Oh, crap. I forget what I was going to. Only 10% of the House of Representatives has seats that can go to either party, depending on who.
10 to 15.
90% of Congress has seats that are owned, that are in solidly Republican or solidly Democratic districts, which means there are very few people who are willing to be in the middle to try to appeal to both sides.
Yeah, we need political reforms as well. We need redistricting reform. The objective is to maximize the number of competitive districts, not minimize them, consistent with the Voting Rights Act. We need integrating open primaries. We need campaign finance reform. We need 12-year term limits. I could go on, but that's enough.
Well, and today we are at the top of the hour, and we've had a great conversation. Goodbye, everyone. We'll see you next week at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Every Monday we have this conversation, but next week David's on vacation. I think we're going to discuss his op-ed. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Be good.
Bye.
Take care.